Do you hear that sound? I hear the rumor of a good life. Do you hear it now? Must be the rumor of a good life. I looked into the future, it was all the same. I was under the sky, no new horizons. Maybe there is no one else to...
Welcome back everyone to Campbell's Footballs with me, Grant Campbell. I'm joined for this episode by a gentleman who is a fan of a range of clubs. He's a fan of the Dandy Dons, which is absolutely fantastic, but also importantly a massive Scotland fan, part of the charity known as the Tarn Army Sunshine Appeal, and much more. He's also a writer too. It is Clark Gillis. Clark, a warm welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
How's things coping with your end with the pandemic and a range of other things going on at the moment?
Just confined to North Ayrshire just now, really nothing we can do, just weekends coming, just out walks and check the football scores, and that's about it really.
Yeah, I mean it's
back where the kids are out of school now and back to work, so
yeah, no, it's extremely frustrating for us all, and you know the fact that there's no fans in stadia at the moment, just seeing some of the games, it's just not the same as, you know, watching it on telly, is it?
No. Not even on the radio. It's any fun at all now. Just no fun at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How have you been keeping busy during this period, apart from that?
Well, I'm quite lucky that I've had a chance to work, so been able to do work, but just in case the weekends, just find stuff to do with the kids, like taking walks on the beach, taking to a park, just playing games, doing a lot of reading just now.
Yeah, I mean it's
where the kids are out of school now and back to work, so
yeah, no, it's extremely frustrating for us all, and you know the fact that there's no fans in stadia at the moment, just seeing some of the games, it's just not the same as, you know, watching it on telly, is it?
No, not even on the radio. It's any fun at all now. Just no fun at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How have you been keeping busy during this period, apart from that?
Well, I'm quite lucky that I've had a chance to work, so been able to do work, but just in case the weekends, just find stuff to do with the kids, like taking walks on the beach, taking to a park, just playing games, doing a lot of reading just now, just stuff like that, just to pass the time, really.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult, I think, for trying to keep motivated and things like that. Right. And you know, it's just a deeply frustrating time. Obviously, one of the great things that's been happening, of course, during the pandemic is Scotland getting to European finals, and you know, I'm sure you'll be absolutely delighted about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely thrilled. I mean, it's 20. Well, we've been 22. It's now 23 years, but eventually got there, and been a long road and many twists and turns and many false dawns, but finally there at long last.
Yeah. How did you cope during the Serbia match? I think everybody found it a real struggle.
Thought we played the game very well and looked good, and just typical Scotland fashion. Just when you think we've got it, they grab a goal in the death, and it's thinking, oh, it's going to be one of those. And watching extra time through my fingers, because it was just terrible feeling getting back to that, and then the penalties, which was just, I hope Scotland never have to go to penalties ever again, because I just can't handle it at all.
I don't know what
they all took their penalties, and then when Marshall saved that penalty at the end, got the trouble for waking the kids up. But I think a lot of fathers and wives around Scotland got into trouble for that night.
Yeah, I was sent packing for the penalties that were taking place. I wasn't allowed to watch them live. My family had it on, and I was sent to another room in the house because everybody thinks I'm a bit of a jinx. So that was quite interesting from my point of view. Yeah. But for Scotland to get to a European finals, and hopefully they'll get the games at Hampden, obviously pandemic, pending. You know, how do you rate Scotland's chances, Clark?
I think the home advantage is a big plus. I think, while I'm a bit of an old traditionalist, I would prefer it if the tournament was in the one country, like Germany or Italy or even England, but we wait 22 years and we finally qualify for something that's in our own stadium, so it's a bit of an odd one, but if there's fans allowed in the stadium, if it's what it sounds like, it's going to be only home fans only. I think that should be a good initiative for us, that we'll hopefully have that back and let Wembley handle itself, and got quite a good record against the Czechs and got a very good record against the Croatians. So you never know. Get something out of those two games. It's one for the next round, but just let Wembley deal itself.
Yeah, no, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens with Scotland. But we'll talk about that a little bit further on throughout the show. Clark, as I said, it's great to have you on. I mentioned your intro at the start. You're a range of football. Loves, obviously, Aberdeen as well as Scotland and a range of other things. We'll tap into that throughout the show. My first question I always like to ask my guests is, what made you want to go into the world of football in the first place? How did your love of football come about?
Just come from a football daft family, basically. Just when I was a kid, wasn't madly into it. That kind of came later, but just as a kid, it was there, and I enjoyed watching games. And growing up in the 80s, I had this affection for a team that played in red. I just didn't know they were based on the other side of the country, but just every time I turned on the TV, they seemed to be winning. So I just thought, be a bit of a glory hunter and follow this mob. That it turned into Aberdeen, and then it just seemed to be a case of that was about 87, 88-ish. Vaguely remember the Fergie years, but it's mostly his last year, but mostly Alex Smith years are my earliest memories.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in the early 90s, and, I think that the Alex Smith era was an era that I think a lot of Aberdeen fans look back on and think that maybe he should have had more time, and maybe should have had a bit more respect than maybe he got at that period in time. And, obviously coming off the back of what Sir Alex had done, tremendous achievement, of course. It was always going to be a tough act to follow.
Yep. Also think it hurt me a wee bit that Jockey Scott left. I think when the two of them were the team together, I think it was good cop, bad cop, but they gelled together, and it just proved a wee bit when they went elsewhere that they just never had the same effect anywhere else. And yeah, that time at Aberdeen when they were together, they just seemed to click and gel perfectly for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In terms of following footballers, not just Aberdeen, kind of growing up, who were your inspirations? Or did you have any?
Naturally, the first one I'll remember is Maradona. I remember the 1990 World Cup. I don't have much in the way of memories of the 86 World Cup, so I missed the whole buzz around that. But I just remember everybody was Maradona. Gascoigne, he was another one. I just remember as a kid, because if you were growing up in that period, he was never off TV and stuff like that. Just a joy to watch.
Yeah.
And really, I never really got much into the European football. And that's it just really condensed the Scottish football for me at the time. And
yeah.
My favourite players were McLeish, Miller, Leighton especially. That was a hero of mine. And then going to the 90s, just always supported Brian Irvine. He was probably Miller, McLeish, but I would say, to me, it's Brian Irvine. He was always the top man.
Yeah, I've had Brian on my own show, and he's just such a great guy, isn't he? He just talks very well, and he doesn't kind of get big-headed about things. He just says, I just did my best, and, at the time, hopefully it was good enough, and I really admired that with Brian. Yeah,
one of the fans who lived the dream, basically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, being a Don's Trust member as well, you've seen Aberdeen through periods of good times and periods of not so good times. What's your memory in summary of following the club? It's a roller coaster, isn't it?
It's a roller coaster. That's a perfect way to describe it. I mean, growing up, first couple of years was always a case of playing second fiddle to Rangers, doing well in maybe the League Cup, Scottish Cup, get to the odd final, and basically not doing it at the last minute. You've then got Smith moving on after a poor last season. You've got basically the prodigal son coming in, but Willie Miller, and you're thinking, right, this is it, back to his Fergie days. This is going to win. He just seemed to be the case of cup finals and finishing second to Rangers, but just couldn't get us over that final hurdle. Then he had his bad season. Then we had the Aitken years, and bad first season, but then he then took a team that fought off relegation, won the League Cup just 7 months later. So there was a good team there. It just didn't click that season. Then he got it to click, and I think we had a good season two under him, and then just back to them. Then it was Miller, and less said about that, the better. And then you got the Ebbie Scovdale years, which I think a lot of people look badly on, but it's a kind of period I look back over with like a wry smile on my face, thinking, they were bad, but it was good days out at the football. It was never boring, and while we did fight off relegation a few times, some of the best away games I've had were under Scovdale. I've been going to McDermott Park and winning 3-0, Avril and players like Norton and Rowson and all that coming on and break into the team. So that was good. And then you've got the Jimmy Calderwood years, which it's kind of odd period because I kind of fell out of love of football at the time, especially Aberdeen. I just couldn't. During the Scovdale years, I just couldn't. You couldn't keep me away. Then under Calderwood, it was just the case. I just kind of lost a bit of interest a wee bit, but comes and goes. And but after that, I got married and got a family, so it was not a case against every game as I used to be. And
yes.
And now we've had a few good years under McInnes, and now he's away. We're just to wait and see what comes after this.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens after Derek McInnes. And by the time the show comes out, I would like to hope that Aberdeen will have a new manager. So that will be absolutely fascinating to see what happens. But you touched on the Scovdale areas, and I sort of had a smile on my face when you said that, because you mentioned Arnold Stavrum, and I still maintain this, and I still say this to people. He's the first name I had on the back of any Aberdeen strip growing up. And one of the great things I loved about Stavrum, he either scored or he got caught offside. There was nothing in between. It was just a character.
It's one of those things where you always think yourself, wish we got him 2 or 3 years earlier, or we could have kept him on board for another 3 or 4 years. And I think he would have broken all sorts of records if we'd kept him around, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah, but and another player that really took my attention as well was Zarali, the late Hisham Zarali. I mean, an unbelievable player, and it didn't quite happen for him at times, and then obviously he sadly died far too.
Exactly.
A
great talent, but always maintained. I just thought he wasn't what we needed for that team. That he wasn't the type of player you needed in a relegation dogfight team. I always felt if he'd stayed around and maybe played under Calderwood, I think he would have shone in that team. But I think just the Scovdale team wasn't for him. But great talent.
And as well as the Scovdale days, we struggled in the league, but to reach 2 cup finals that season, the League Cup against Celtic, and then of course that Scottish Cup final against Rangers in 2000. I remember both those finals so well. We didn't win either of them, but it was just great to be there at the time because
exactly that was the main point. That was the main point. I mean, League Cup final, I just felt we froze in the day and didn't do anything. And the Scottish Cup finals was going to be the greatest what if. I mean, what if Leighton had not got injured in the first minute, we didn't play with Robbie Winters in goals, what would have happened that day? Just one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you move away from that, and you mentioned about the Calderwood eras, and that was a time where I thought Aberdeen, you just didn't know what you were going to get. There was periods where
the first season,
we were okay, and there was other periods where we just didn't cut it, especially in the cups.
Yeah. I mean, that was my big. I mean, the big hope is always you do well in the league, but you always want a cup maybe once every couple of years. You get to a final at least, and it just seemed to be with him. He prioritised the league, and when it got to the cups, he just seemed to freeze at the worst possible time. I mean, you've got some horrible cup games under him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's some really interesting players that were around that time, weren't there? I mean, people like Barry Nicholson, I thought were really good in that time. Scott Severin, I thought was very underrated. And of course, they got to the UEFA Cup under Calderwood in that period, and I don't know if you were there for the nights against Copenhagen and Bayern Munich and other teams, but what a special time.
Yeah. Oh, it was great just to see us doing well, and against good quality teams as well. I mean, after so many years of Skonto Riga and going to these places and struggling against Barrytown, you get into the group stage and you think, oh, we're here to make up the numbers, and putting a good show against Lokomotiv Moscow. I mean, no mugs, they're a big side with talent and wealth beyond what we've got. I think it was it Panathinaikos? That was
Panathinaikos, Panathinaikos, yeah.
That was a poor show, and then you've got the game which I don't think anybody saw coming against Copenhagen. Everybody thought, damage limitation. Then we just go out. I think it's one of the all-time top performances in a European night at Tawdry.
Yeah, I think it's one of the all-time top European performances by any club in Scotland. I still maintain that. I think it's right up there. Obviously Celtic and Rangers have had big nights, of course, but for a club outside of that to have a night like they did in Aberdeen 4-0, and that night, that second half especially, everything Aberdeen touched that evening went in. The regret I had was Jamie Smith not getting the hat-trick. I mean, he was clean through and he put it in the side net, and I thought he was gonna get a hat trick, and it didn't quite happen. Can't complain with a 4-0 win, can you?
Exactly. In Europe, no chance. Would regret that.
Were you at the Bayern Munich? Any of the two Bayern Munich games? I mean, that was
no,
a special
Bayern
night.
Munich. I didn't expect to get into the next round, so I'd booked a wee. I think it was Valentine's weekend or something that week.
I remember our house was getting an extension done at the time, so we had workers in the house and we were watching the game through in the living room. And I remember when Josh Walker scored the opening goal, everybody ran through to see the replay. It was so funny.
I went to Warsaw for a couple of days that week, and we watched it in a bar in Warsaw. Just it was madness seeing Aberdeen in Europe, seeing Aberdeen TV against Bayern Munich, and we're actually. You're thinking to yourself, is this going to be 83 happening all over again?
Yeah, no, it's just absolutely fantastic. And, we haven't even talked about the Dnipro game as well, to get there as well. That was a special night. And we'll talk about, your love of Dynamo Kiev as well, which I think very interesting. But, you talk a lot about, that Aberdeen team. Jamie Langfield, had his critics, but he had some big moments in the Donshire, and that Dnipro night was one of them.
That was, I'll just explain that my wife's Ukrainian, so I've been visiting Ukraine since 2003. And the Dnipro, while they were not the level of Shakhtar and Dynamo, they were effectively the third force of Ukrainian football at the time, and had a big oligarch owner that invested in the teams. And while they hadn't moved into a new stadium then, they were on the verge of moving to a big new stadium, and they've actually went bust since and had to restart from scratch. But I was just saying to her, I don't think we'll get anything this game. And I thought we got really lucky in the first round at Pataudry, and I just thought we're not going to go to Ukraine and get a result there. And again, it was just a magical night again. Just going through in the away goals, which is something very few clubs ever do in Scotland.
Yeah, and Aberdeen don't make things easy for themselves. And the great thing about that period is, I don't know if you did, but I certainly savoured that period because, a club getting to Europe and Scottish football is something, apart from Celtic Rangers, something that very rarely happens on a consistent basis. But, obviously we had the very lean years under Mark McGee, of course, and then Craig Brown sort of steadied the ship. But Derek McInnes came in and, I felt professionalised Aberdeen and really made them a force again. And the League Cup success in 2014, a really standout moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what the club really needed, was just that cup win that had been put. They'd not got close enough for so many years, and I think that was really needed, because if that didn't happen, then I don't know what was going to happen. But it just seemed to be, we got that success pretty early under McInnes, and it just seemed to be that got the ball rolling for a lot of things with him.
And in terms of the players in and around the squad that McInnes had at Aberdeen, who did you really enjoy in a Donshire? I mean, I really like players like Adam Rooney. The dynamic between Johnny Hayes and Niall McGinn was second to none. It was a great time to be a Dons fan.
I thought it was a really good time. I mean, effectively took Craig Brown's team. He did all the signings, and it just seemed to be, he tinkered by adding the odd player here and there. I mean, only thing about McInnes is he would sign like 100 players and he would move ones on fast that didn't work. But when he did find a player, that would make all the difference. And as you said, Adam Rooney was phenomenal those first couple of years. And yet for some reason he fell out with him very quickly, and he just seemed to always be out to replace him very often. And it was, he had a good few years left in him, and you just couldn't understand why. Yeah. And he just never really got that replacement that he was looking for till Cosgrove came along.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned Craig Brown there, which is very interesting. Does Craig Brown not get enough credit in the story of Derek McInnes at Aberdeen because he blamed the foundations?
I think it's easily forgotten about. I think if you say to a lot of people it's McGee, it was so bad, and then it was McInnes. I think a lot of people kind of forget Brown in the middle. Which I think he deserves his plaudits, because we were so bad under McGee that Craig Brown came in and did what he does. He's done well wherever he goes, where he's steadied the ship, he's signed some good players. He's maybe not got the results, but he's got the players playing well and just grounding out results. And then the next guys came in and he's had the easiest job in the world.
Yeah. And in terms of Aberdeen, obviously, Derek, as we recorded this, has now left the club, and the Dons are searching for a new manager on the 10th of March. During his time, Clark, what's your memories you'll take away of McInnes?
Easily the best manager we've had since Alex Smith. I think that's for sure. Maybe on a par. Maybe in the terms of history of Don's managers, maybe on a par with Smith to a degree. Done very well. Could we have done better with Rangers out the picture? It's debatable, but he's got us a cup. He gave us some good European nights, which I think was one of the main things. I mean, the first couple of runs in Europe, I mean, we beat some big teams, and that's something we've missed out for a long time. I mean, European-wise, we've not done well in Europe since the Ferguson days. And he's came in, and I think he's put Europe a priority and done well there.
Yeah. Is there a frustration that maybe there wasn't another Scottish Cup or a League Cup to add to the one in 2014 and maybe a playoff round in Europe?
Yeah. He got the League Cup, and I think the Scottish Cup semi-final defeat to St John's, I think that was a hard one to swallow, because I think if we had beat St Johnstone, we'd have went to the final. I think that would have been the double that year. But just was to be, and it's just seemed with Europe, we seem to get so far, and we got beatable teams. We didn't get hard teams, but we've got what you would consider a beatable team, that if you got past them, then you're into the next round, and that's where you're coming up against your Liverpools, your AC Milans, the teams you want to see coming to Pittodrie and playing well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're part of the Dons Trust, which is a really interesting group. They own Wimbledon as well, which is yes, very interesting. And AFC Wimbledon's a really interesting club. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved with them.
Basically, when I've got cousins in London, and when we used to go down in the 80s, we used to always go down. They're all Arsenal fans, and one year we went down and we just thought Saturday, we'll go to a game of football. Checked the fixtures. I think it was like Man United against Arsenal. We just thought, we'll never get tickets for that. So we're phoning around trying to get tickets. Couldn't get any at all for that because I was going to go because of Fergie. Then we kind of just looked around the fixtures to see what else was on in London. And we saw Millwall against Birmingham City. I don't really have that. Then there was Leyton Orient against Charlton. That's interesting, but it's the other side of London, not good. And then we just saw one fixture. Well, Wimbledon against Ipswich Town. No, sorry, Coventry. It was Coventry City. That's interesting. Not the most fanciful teams, but Wimbledon had just won the cup, and it was one of those games you think, that takes our fancy. We'll go ahead and along and see that. And this is the English, it was Division 1 at the time, Premier League. I mean, you've got Old Trafford, you've got Chelsea, you've got all these big stadiums. Then you go to this little, like, non-league ground almost. I mean, what would I compare it to in Scotland? Somerset Park or like Capello, it's that type of style ground.
Yeah. Just
a hodgepodge of different stands, and you've got terracings, and you've got the barbed wire all around the pitch because this is still the 80s, so the fans were still in the bad books. Dire 0-0 game, but just something about the whole atmosphere made me enjoy it. That I loved it so much. So I kind of stuck with them in the 90s, checking out the results. And then you've got when the club would move to Milton Keynes, and they said about starting AFC Wimbledon from scratch with trials in Wimbledon Common. I was about 19 at the time, eager as mustard. And I thought, I fancy getting the football boots on, going down to Wimbledon, trying out that, but I didn't go. It was just one of those heat of the moment things. What you thought, it sounds good, but then no point. And then just followed the club straight on from there, and just thought, I'll join the Dons Trust, and that way you get a share of the club, so you're keeping the club fanned on, you get a say in everything. With the move to the new stadium, it was literally a case of you were getting emails every week saying what would you like to see in the stadium, how would you like the seat colours to be, what would you like the stadium to be used for. So it felt like proper like fan run in a club that just building up through the leagues, and you're just getting this say in how the club's getting run, and it's kind of the thing I like. I'm just a bit of an old-fashioned football romantic.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't get that anymore. I mean, in Scotland, you probably compare it to the old man who goes to the Highland League or junior football and just literally shows up on a Saturday, not a member of the club, but he'll help out. It's that kind of feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, the story of Wimbledon. And, I remember the good old days of, the being in the Premier League, and, players like Robbie Earle and Ifeanyi Cocu and Neil Sullivan, of course. I mean, that Wimbledon team, and obviously the history of, that very famous line by John Motson when they beat Liverpool, the crazy gang of beating the Culture Club in that FA Cup game. The history of that is something that will never die, I think, in Wimbledon.
No, I think it's the fairy tale that I don't think any club's going to come close. I mean, you've got clubs like Fleetwood Town are now in the leagues, but they've had money. I mean, they spent, before they even got into the league, they spent £15 million in one stand in their stadium. You've got Forest Green, but again, they've got money. You've got Salford coming up the leagues, and again, it's a case of they've got massive backers. So Wimbledon is just like that fairy tale where a club went from amateur league into the Southern Conference League, then got into the Football League and just seemed to rise up like a rocket through the league, and then win the FA Cup within 8 years of being elected to the league.
Yeah, and then the whole dynamic with Milton Keynes Dons is a really interesting subject.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the politics of that, but it's fascinating. And I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was in the FA Cup, MK Dons and AFC Wimbledon played against each other, and of course, there's no rivals lost there.
No, I mean, it just seemed to be as soon as we got into the Football League, we just can't get rid of them. It seems to be drawing the Cup every year, League Cup, FA Cup, the English version of the Challenge Cup, get them in the same league. I mean, there was actually a period there where we were one league ahead of them, and they got relegated and we stayed up. So there was a few happy people when that day was confirmed.
Yeah, it certainly was. And I mean, Wimbledon are a club that I like to kind of keep an eye on just in the Football League, because you just want to kind of see them progressing. And I think with all these sort of kind of historical clubs, you want to see them do. I mean, I was talking to a friend the other day, and I mean, I'm nearly 30 now, and growing up, I remember the likes of Coventry City, Bradford City, Portsmouth, people like Nottingham Forest being in the top flight of English football. And when you don't see them anywhere near the top flight of the Premier League now, it's such a sad state.
I mean, I had it for a few years. They were Bournemouth, that you felt, they've got that kind of old spirit. But if you take that, you don't have a team like that in that league. It's just too much of a Super League, and it's boring, and there's no like club got a charm about it. You want these old style team charms, teams that are just expected to be dog fights, and then they upset a lot of people by going to Old Trafford and getting a victory here, a victory there.
Yeah, absolutely. Clark, you mentioned earlier on in the show about your relationship with your Ukrainian wife, and in your profile here on Twitter, you're a Dynamo Kiev fan, and it's very interesting to chat to somebody who follows Ukrainian football. But Dynamo Kiev are a really interesting club. Can you tell me how that came about?
When I was growing up, I had this weird fixation about European football, and everybody else was getting like Shoot magazine or all those kind of football magazines. For some reason, I always got addicted to World of Soccer magazine. A more highbrow one that talks about African football, European football, and just for some reason, I took an interest in the Eastern European style teams, and just seeing all these names. And the first time I probably remember them was, I think it was 1991. Dynamo Kiev played Rangers in a friendly at Ibrox.
Yeah.
My dad being a Rangers fan, he went to that game and brought the programme back, and I was just curious about this team, Dynamo Kiev, and just their D-style logo was just something that hypnotic I felt about it, and just reading through the programme, and you've got all these obscure, unpronounceable names, just something about it I quite liked about it. Then you've got the 90s, you've got Rebrov and Shevchenko, and this was back in the days where you could get football on ITV, so you were getting European nights all the time, and you're getting Barcelona against Dynamo Kiev in the Champions League, and you're going to see them going to Old Trafford and playing against Man United. It just kind of grew from that, and then as you get to about 2000, you start getting to the internet age, and you're starting to learn a bit more of the history of the club and all that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see Dynamo Kiev's kind of time in the Ukrainian league, because they're one of the powerhouses of Ukrainian football. And you mentioned obviously the battles with Shakhtar Donetsk, and I always enjoy seeing some of these clubs in the Champions League battle. And they're one of these teams, Dynamo Kiev, that they always seem to get there, and it's really fascinating to see how they get on. You don't expect them to pull up any trees, but you expect them to give a good account and always give teams a battle, especially on their own pitch.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it used to be a case of when they played at home, it was the Ukraine national team that was playing, so they wouldn't play in their small stadium, which is on the edge of the city centre. It's a small 15,000 seater stadium. They would play in the big 80,000 Olympic stadium, and it would be packed. I mean, I've got friends in Kiev. They tell me about the days of the European nights and against Bayern Munich and all these teams, and a stadium that holds maybe 80,000 and there's at least 120,000 Ukrainians in it, just willing the team on to win those games.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing, some stories. And basically, the whole thing went up a notch when I was at a Scotland-Lithuania game around about 2003, and I got chatting to this girl at the table next when we went to this restaurant, and just got a chance to say, whereabouts Lithuania you're from? She says, I'm not from Lithuania, I'm from actually a country I've never heard of, probably. And I was like, where? She said, Ukraine. I was like, right. Then I asked to say, I know about Dynamo Kiev and all that. And we just got a chance. She was there with Christian Aid, and she had just done a bit of an exchange thing. And we got a chance. She said, here's my email address, just email me. And about a year later, I said, I'm going to go to Ukraine. And I texted this girl and said, I'm coming to Ukraine for a couple of days. You fancy meeting up? Maybe I'll catch a game of football and I'll see you at some point. And one thing led to another, and about 3 years later, we were married. And she's now moved to Scotland. So,
absolutely fantastic story.
Yep.
Absolutely fantastic story there, Clark. Really interested to hear that. And the great thing about football is that you just make so many connections, and then time moves by, and you think, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to have that. And it's fantastic, isn't it? And just hearing that story there was absolutely fantastic to hear that. I think that's really, really great. In terms of the Ukrainian league, I mean, Dynamo Kiev, obviously, along with Shakhtar, very representative in Europe. As we're recording this, Dynamo Kiev are still in the Europa League. They'll be drawn against Villarreal. I mean, what do you make of their chances in Europe? I mean, Villarreal, an interesting team, obviously, doing well in the Spanish league under Unai Emery.
Yeah, it seems to be Europe. They had a couple of good runs in Europe a few years back. I think we got to the quarters and semis of the Europa League fairly recently, and it seems to be they miss the big teams, but they'll come maybe against the likes of a Benfica. They'll maybe come against a Club Bruges, but they seem to always seem to avoid the likes of Barcelona, Juventus, PSG, all these. And they seem to always do quite well, but then they just seem to let themselves down when it comes to things. But it just seems to be there's been a bit of an internal war between the fans and the club at the last few years, because they don't like when the club appoint a new manager and it's not the fans' choice. They buy a player who they think they buy a player for maybe 2 million with the name to sell him for 20 million, and then agree for a fee of 20 million is agreed, and the chairman will change his mind and say, no, I want 25 million. He'll always try and get that extra couple of million on top of what the agreed deal was. It just seems to be the chairman's not interested in the club. He's just interested in the money that comes with owning the club.
Yeah, it's been an interesting season for Dynamo Kiev, because obviously they were in the Champions League and they were a really interesting group. Juventus and Barcelona and Ferencváros, of course. Scottish football fans will remember Ferencváros obviously dumping Celtic out. I mean, what did you make of that group? Because obviously you have the dynamic there with Juventus, with Ronaldo and Messi, also with Barcelona. And then Kiev, of course, in there. They got a win in the group, a very, very tough group, I've got to say. To finish third is probably the best you could have hoped for.
I think in a group like that, it's a case of finishing thirds. When you're not the top two, the finishing thirds is as good as you'll get.
Yeah, no, it was a very interesting group, and I'm really looking forward to see how they get on in the Europa League, because I do think that Villarreal game will be winnable.
I think it's a winnable time. They seem to be doing well in the league and the cups, and it seems to be they're getting to Europe now in later stages. So whatever comes from this point.
Obviously, you're a Scotland national team fan, but on the international stage, do you also keep an eye on Ukraine?
Yeah, just because I've got family, friends out there, so I just always keep an eye on the results of them, and because they've qualified for more World Cups, European Championships than we have of late, it's a case of when they get there, it's I'm supporting them when they get there.
Yeah, because a few years ago, I think, didn't Kiev host the Euros?
2012. I mean, I had it all planned out. If Scotland qualified, we were going to go out for a month, stay with the in-laws, but just didn't want to go at all in the end, and just thought, no, it's not.
That's a shame.
Game, but when Scotland aren't there, I just don't want to go. I'm just not interested. I lose interest.
Yeah, that was an interesting tournament, because Spain were ruthless at that tournament, weren't they? And they dismantled Italy in that final. They were really, really good. And of course, Italy, had that very infamous shootout with England in the Andrea Pirlo Panenka penalty.
Exactly, aye.
Yeah, that was a fascinating tournament. I thought that was really interesting. But obviously, we've mentioned a lot about Ukraine, and one of my favourite memories of Scotland is playing Ukraine. And obviously, that 3-1 game at Hampden.
Oh
A,
yeah,
were you there? And B, were you definitely in the Scotland then?
yeah, and yes, on both counts. My wife sitting beside me, and I think it was about 2 weeks before she would talk to me again because of that result that night. Yeah, as I've been following Scotland a long time, and I've always maintained my time of following Scotland, that's the best all-round performance I've seen us play.
Yes.
I mean, that was a Ukraine team that got to the quarterfinals of the World Cup. They have Shevchenko in the team. They had a lot there.
They had Voronin in the team, who was at Liverpool at the time, I think.
Yep, yeah, he's got a funny thing with the national team.
Shovkovsky was a goalkeeper. He was quite good.
Yeah. And he went to Timashek, who was at Bayern Munich.
That's right.
So a good team, and it was just one of those days where we didn't look like losing, and I just thought, all right, they pegged it back to 1-1, but I just thought it's one of those games we're not going to lose. And it just seemed to be played for arrogance and a confidence that night that I've just not seen Scotland play with for a long time before, and very few, maybe only a handful of times since.
Yeah, it was an absolutely fantastic performance, and I remember that so well. Kenny Miller scored very early on, didn't he? And then we got a goal. I think we scored twice inside the first 10 minutes, didn't we? It was absolutely superb. And I think was it McFadden that got the second goal? A really great curling strike into the top corner. I remember
was it not McCulloch?
Lee McCulloch, that's right. Lee McCulloch.
I think McFadden got the third.
Yeah, the third goal, that's right. And I think was it Shevchenko that got the Ukraine goal?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great performance. And then, of course, Scotland had a very tough group then, of course. It was that Italy and France as well. You know, it was probably the hardest group Scotland could have got when you think about it.
I just remember the day, watching the draw on my computer at college and just thinking, right, what we're going to get? And it's just your hands going, your heart's just sinking as you see all these teams come out, Italy, Ukraine, and then you've got France, and then you've got another trip to Lithuania, which is never a good place to go to. You've got the Faroe Islands, which is never a good place to go to, and you're just thinking to yourself, oh, right, fishing further for lucky, but it's most likely going to be fourth.
Yeah. No, some very interesting times, that group, that was for sure. You mentioned, obviously, that you've been a Tartan Army fan for a long period of time there, Clark. What's your best memories of following the Scotland national team?
Oh, so many. I mean, so many highs and lows. I mean, like I said, we scoffed earlier on when it was going to games, terrible games, but going for you always sit with a smile on your face thinking back to them. I'm kind of like that with votes as well. I mean, some of the not necessarily the best games, but some of the best trips I've ever been on were back in the votes days. I remember when we played Moldova. This was just after I met my future wife, and I said to her, do you want to come to Moldova, meet my friends, because there's going to be there's going to be maybe 2,000 Scots in Moldova that day, so we'll go down the bus and we'll meet them. So we went down the bus from Liev, which is in western Ukraine, got to the border, Moldova-Ukraine border, about 3:00 in the morning. The guy takes my passport. I kind of just put my head back to fall asleep again. 5 minutes later, he comes on and he calls my name out, and I'm like, oh, what's happening here? So got this border guard speaking to me in Ukrainian. I don't speak a word of it, so my wife's translating. She's getting a kind of heated argument, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? I mean, am I in trouble? Then she kind of stops with a look of what on her face, like she was just a blank look of what have you said. Then she turns to me and says, he wants one of your football shirts. I was like, what do you mean? He doesn't believe any fans are going to this game, especially via Ukraine. He thinks you're one of the Scotland national team players coming from Dynamo Kiev to play for your national team in Moldova, and he wants one of your Dynamo Kiev shirts.
Brilliant.
And that took some explaining to this guard at 3 a.m. that, no, it's not the case. I am literally a fan. I'm here to go to the game.
Super.
So I've always had a good one out of that. And another one.
Well, the reason while you're thinking of others, John Bleasdale, the guy that hopefully you know, and certainly I know, obviously following Scotland, he says, what's been your favourite away trip so far towards Scotland? And apart from a finals, is top of your bucket list for future trips?
If I can't pick one, but I'll pick maybe my top 3 or 4. But
yeah, go on.
There's that Moldova game. I always kind of liked that. There was also the Slovenia game about a year later when we won 3-0 in Celje.
Yeah.
I went with my friends we went via.
That was a really good performance. Probably one of the more underrated performances away from home for Scotland.
Yep. I've also got the Republic of Ireland game at Celtic Park, which, as I said earlier, I think since that Ukraine game at Hampden, I think that and the Croatia game where we won 2-0 at Hampden, I think they're the two best performances I've seen in my lifetime from home, where we've displayed a confidence and a swagger that's been missing from Scotland. And probably also got the England game at Euro 96. I went down to that with my dad. And then probably my all-time one was the Brazil game at the Stade de France in 1998 World Cup with my grandfather. And I think I'm kind of the age now where I wish I appreciated it more, because I was just young at the time and thinking I was used to going to Scotland qualifying all the time. And I just thought, there's always the next one. Mm-hmm. Not thinking the next one would be 25 years plus later, maybe.
Yeah.
But at that Brazil game, we're up in the heavens of the Stade de France and just watch the teams come out. And then you've got Ronaldo in the Brazil team, and he just seems to have an aura about him, made him about 10 feet taller than everybody else in the national anthems. You could just see the Brazil team, you could see Ronaldo just aura about him. That was probably my favourite day of them all.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely fantastic. Were you there for the whole of 90, or were you just there for that Brazil game?
Yes, we just went for that game and back. We'd managed to get tickets, the two of us, so we just flew in for that and flew back out the next day.
I was only 7 at the time, but I still remember that opening game against Brazil. And, I remember crying my eyes out when the ball went in off Tom Boyd for the late winner, because I thought we deserved a draw in that game. I thought we were superb.
I thought we played very well that day. I just thought it's just typical Scotland fashion where we don't lose to a piece of class from Ronaldo. I mean, if we'd lost 2-1, it'd been Ronaldo scoring a piece of class at the end, like his iconic goal for Inter Milan, or that one he scored for Barcelona where he's ducking and dashing around everybody. If it had been something like that, I would have walked away that day happy. But to be an own goal bouncing off of Tom Boyd, just a bit of a sickener.
And we mentioned there about some of the memories. What about future trips moving forward? Any countries that is on your bucket list to go and watch the Tartan Army?
There's actually very few these days. I've been about everywhere because I'm one of these guys where I'll travel to a game and I'll find the most obscure next door neighbour country to go via. So some people say, I always want to go to Armenia. I've ticked it off the bucket list. When we played Georgia, I went via Armenia with a couple of mates and did the 4-hour bus journey from Yerevan up to Tbilisi. I missed the Kazakhstan game. I'd love to have done that one. I suppose that's still on my bucket list to go to Kazakhstan.
It'll be a better game than...
Hopefully be a better game this next time around. I'd like to see us play in Africa. I mean, I've seen us play in Asia when we played Japan. I've seen us play across Europe, but I'd like to see us play in Africa just some point in my lifetime. I think that'd be a good experience to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, following the Scotland national team, you've seen a range of players put on that blue strip. Who's your favourite players?
Growing up, he was a Rangers player. I was always happy when McCoist was in the team because he gave us like a game against Greece at Hampden where he just came off the bench, and I was as if my scout group at that game, and I just remember the guy behind me saying, "Don't give it to McCoist, don't give it to McCoist." And there's a free kick in, and I know it was a corner kick in, and McCoist has got his header in, and the guy behind me's changed his tune. I knew he would score.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Always being a Dons fan, it was always Jim Lane was the top man for me when it came to that type of thing. I always preferred him being goals, and I was happy when he got the nod at the World Cup in '98 because I think he deserved it after that Sweden game at Ibrox, which I think people talk about, but I just don't think he gets enough credit because I don't think you see Andy Goran playing that many good games for Scotland, and he puts in a performance like that, and it's just kind of puts the back of people's minds a little bit.
Yeah.
Colin Hendry, he was another one. I met Colin Hendry at a fans event, and a lot of good stories to hear from him about that period. Then you get to turn of the century. There seems to be there's not the same calibre of players, but you've got some exciting players. I mean, you've got James McFadden, Darren Fletcher. James Morrison was always a player I liked watching. I don't think he got anywhere near enough credit. The same with Graham Alexander, and he was another player who thought didn't get the credit he deserved. And another case of if he had just gotten the team maybe 4 or 5 years earlier, we might have got a lot more of him than I think.
Yeah.
And Kenny Miller was always a player that I just enjoyed watching Scotland. I mean, he had that 2-year Barron spell where he got booed against Liechtenstein, but got a goal, and then it just seemed to be a nice period where he just seemed to score every game.
Yeah. No, he was a brilliant player, Kenny Miller. If I was to pick a player in my lifetime, I would probably pick him just purely for his work rate. I thought, as that tallest man up front, he did so much donkey work up front, and I still don't think that we look now and you when he's not playing, you just think, who's that out ball now? I mean, you've got guys like Lyndon Dykes who I think have got potential, but do they have the same work rate that Miller has? I'm not too sure.
When I watch Dykes, I just think that it is a bit Kenny Miller-esque about him. He just not got that touch of flair.
He's a bit raw still. He's still a bit raw.
Yes. Yeah.
But hopefully he'll get there, that's for sure. In terms of the recent World Cup qualifying campaign, of course, we've been drawn with Denmark, Austria, and a few other teams. I mean, should Scotland be looking to qualify out that group?
I think if you talk about groups, I think that's the kindest possible group we could have wished for. I mean, you've avoided the likes of Italy, France, Spain. I mean, as soon as you start drawing those teams, you think yourself, fighting for second, third place at the best.
I mean, we've got Israel again, which is not great.
Getting a bit boring out. I mean, to reach the stage I'm pining for a trip to Lithuania after so many years of going there. It's now a case of Lithuania. Please, Lithuania, come back, all's forgiven.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a group where we could very easily finish fourth, or we could very easily win it. It's one of those I don't think there's a clear now winner. I mean, I don't think we'll go to Vienna and we'll go to Copenhagen and we'll come away with victories. But if we come away with a draw, it's like back. I think Clark's trying to do the Craig Brown mentality. It's a case of get them at home, and whatever you get away is a bonus point. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Steve Clark there, which brings me on to my next question. What have you made of Steve since he's come in? Because he really has done well after a very difficult start with the Scotland team.
I think he had really unlucky at the start. I mean, he came in at the 11th hour after weeks of speculation, and he really had to pick a team before he even got his jacket off. He had to pick a team against Cyprus. He then had a horrible run of games where he had to play Belgium away, Russia at home, Belgium home, Russia away. I mean, no matter who you are, that's a terrible run of games for your next winnable game. He then seemed to get through. He skimmed through them, and they weren't good games at all. But then he got that victory against San Marino, and it just seemed to be he built off of that. He got a good away win in Cyprus, and then he just seemed to be. We were all thinking about the playoffs, and I think if anything, the current COVID pandemic that's played in our favour, because if you think about it, we had a lot of players going into that Israel game for the playoff either unfit or out of form.
Yes.
It just seems to be that extra 5 or 6 months has actually gave us a chance to get McGinn fit, Tierney fit, because he had been out for the best part of a year or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you've got players back in form. So I think that played a big part in it. In the first Israel game in the Nations League, which was 1-1, I just think that was one of those games where I think he wasn't trying to give too much away, but I think he had both eyes firmly on the playoff game rather than that Nations League game. Yeah. And I think it was a really poor game to watch.
Yeah. I mean, some really interesting times for Steve, and obviously getting to the Euros is a phenomenal accomplishment. Do you worry for Scotland long term if a club like, say, for example, Celtic or an English Premier League club comes in for Steve Clark?
As I said, I don't like comparing him to Craig Brown, but I think he's that style of manager where he's content with the job. I mean, he seems to be, one of the most grounded guys you've ever seen to meet. I mean, I don't think he's going to get the Celtic job. I think that was just a case of the press and the bookies basically plucking the first Celtic man out of the air that they could think of who's been doing a job as well. But when he was at Kilmarnock, he couldn't keep his disdain for the West of Scotland mentality. He didn't make any secret of that, how much he wanted. I think he's happy where he's got a Scotland job. He can live with his family in London. He's settled in London. I think he's happy with that. So I've got no fear of him going to a club in Scotland. Is the Scotland job going to make you a top pick for likes of Chelsea and Liverpool? he could win the World Cup, and I don't think he would be in their radar. If we're going to lose into a club in England, it's going to be the likes of a Fulham or a
West Brom, where he was at, of course.
West Brom, exactly. But I think he's been. I think that's what a lot of people forget. He was with Mourinho for a long time, so he's won cups with Mourinho. While he wasn't the main man, he's been there. He's had success. He's tried his own thing at Reading and West Brom. He's been so, but it's not been. He had a good spell at Kilmarnock, was probably even his best spell as his own man, and now he's at the Scotland job. And I think he's content with that. So, touch wood, I think he's here for the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I certainly hope so as well, because he's been a breath of fresh air to the Scotland national team and really given us fans something to look forward to, in my honest opinion. Clark, one of the really interesting things in your story is that you are a member of a really, really great charity called the Tarn Army Sunshine Appeal. Can you tell my listeners what that's all about?
It's basically we're a registered charity that make a donation to help children in need everywhere the Scotland national team play. Our foundation was when Scotland played Bosnia and Sarajevo in 1999. A couple of Scotland fans got chatting to this local translator guy, and he told them the plight of this boy who, during the civil war in Bosnia in the early 90s, his mother was ducking for shelter in Sniper Alley in the centre of Sarajevo, and she got shot, and he got shot through the leg and had to have his leg amputated. And the Scotland fans, at the time, they heard this story, and it just affected them in such a way they thought, right, we'll get the money to try and get him a prosthetic leg and get him better medical care. So over the next few years, they all raised the money, and they eventually got enough money to buy him a prosthetic leg and to let him see the specialist doctor to help his health issues.
Yeah.
And after they'd done that, there was a case of, right, there's some money left over, what should we do with it? And they all agreed, right, we'll donate it the next Scotland game, which was Lithuania in 2003. So they donated, I think it was £1,000 to this local orphanage, and they donated backpacks full of goodie bags, toys, soft toys, books, pencils and paper. And just from that point on, it just seemed to be this could be a regular thing. So since that first donation in 2003, we have made 80 consecutive donations right across Europe. That's donating to everywhere. You name a Scotland game from the last 20 years, whether it's friendlies in Peru and Mexico or over in Japan. If it's a qualifier in the Faroe Islands or Iceland or Moldova, regardless of whether it's been a game in Italy, France, London, we've made a donation to help children there.
Yeah.
Completely self-funded. I mean, we rely completely on the fans and the money they bring in for us. We don't get a penny off the Scottish FA. We don't have any affiliation with the Scottish FA. We just have a nice arm's length relationship that they stay out of our business and we continue with ours. And I came on board. I was actually very proud when I came on board. I got asked one night from their chairman, do I fancy coming on to help? And this was back in 2015. So I said, yeah, I'll come on and help, see what I can do. So I'm one of these guys, you give me a project and I'll literally move heaven and earth to try and improve it in some way or another.
Yeah.
And I like to think I've done my bit. I've helped raise the profile. I mean, I'm one of these guys, if I see an avenue, I'll explore it. So one of the first things I did was I was just messing around on social media one night and I discovered Kichi Anya's brother actually followed me on Twitter. So I just sent him a message saying, hi, would it be possible Kichi would be interested in donating a shirt to the Sunshine Appeal, which we could raffle off to raise funds? Didn't expect much. Got a reply, but 20 minutes later said, if Kichi doesn't donate one, I will make him donate one. So really proud of that. And it was true to his word. We got a Kichi Anya signed Scotland shirt. And actually, a thing about that was a couple of weeks later, we were playing Malta and his brother sent me a message saying, look, my mother's coming across to the game. Do you mind looking after her for a couple of days? And I said, well, we'll take her to our donations. She can meet us. And yeah, we'll keep an eye on her and that's fine. So his mother's, she's some woman that she's just full of life and she's one of these people that you just feel good being about her and stuff like that. And took her to the donation. And at the time, you were raising money by selling off bucket hats in the colours of the Scotland football shirt.
Yeah.
And we're just in the pub, just done our donation to this local charity. And I go, where's Mrs. Anya? I don't know, where is she? And we're like, who last saw her? And we're like, I think I saw her about an hour ago, but I haven't seen her since. And we're like, where is she? Then we noticed the bag full of hats that we were selling's disappearing. I'm thinking, where's the hat? Where's that bag of hats? I mean, there were 50 hats in there. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Anya just storms through, places a bag, this bag that hats were on the table, full of euro notes and all that, and saying, any more hats, I've sold them all. So we've had Akichi Anya's mum's fundraising for us.
Fantastic.
After that, my first donation, which I helped, we've got a steering group of 9 people, 10 people, and we all take turns. And my first one was a friendly against Hungary in Budapest. So I reached out to the British Embassy in Budapest, and they put me in touch with a local Burns Club, and they told us about the plight of this orphanage for Romania gypsy children in a really, really poor part of Budapest, and saying, look, they really need money to help renovate this nursery. It's really sad. There's the toys are broken. They've got no paper and pencils to draw and keep themselves entertained. Is there just anything you can do? I said, well, we'll happily make a donation. So we made a donation. The next thing we know, we're getting messages saying, right, the mayor of Budapest is going to send somebody along to go to this donation. The British ambassador is going to be there. The Hungarian FA are going to send somebody there. The Scottish FA are going to be there. So me and our chairman, we show up on the day, and they've got TV cameras there, and you've got everything, big spectacle, and we're getting shown around this little tiny orphanage. I mean, it was just literally one room with makeshift beds on the side and all that, and the wallpaper looked like it hadn't been touched in maybe about 40 years. The windows were cracked. Just not a nice place for anybody to live in, especially these children have been through so much. And we made a donation of £5,000, and we're so grateful, and seeing the look in the children's faces was amazing. But the one thing that I always remember about that one was they put on a little show for us, and you've got these kids, maybe 6-7 years old. They've got feet work that we make Michael Flatley blush, because these kids were just so good. And I'm just sitting there and just looking around, just getting in the atmosphere. I notice across, you've got this big Hungarian cameraman with his video camcorder over his shoulder. You know, the guy looked like he'd maybe won bronze in the shot putting at the 1982 Olympic Games for the Hungarian national team. I could just see him put the camera away from his face, and he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a handkerchief. I could just see him dabbing away the tears from his eyes. It's like one of those things where you think that's when it's getting through to the locals. And then the next day, I was actually doing a walking tour around the Jewish ghetto in Budapest. The tour guide, for some reason, just kept looking at me and goes, "I know you from somewhere." I was like, "I don't know how. I've only been in Budapest a couple of days." And we're just walking around, and we go to a bar, and then she says, I know where you from. And she ran off to the shop next door and came back a minute later, and she had a newspaper, and she opens it up, and there was a big spreading, big photograph of me and the Sunshine Appeal handing over this donation. And she was just so grateful, and she was telling us how much it meant to her that we had done this to our country. As the day went on, at night I had my flight home, and I'm just sitting down my seat in the airplane, put my headphones on just to chillax a bit in the flight home, and I get this tap on the shoulder, and I take my earphones off, and there's this girl, and she just says to me, "You the guy from the charity who donated the money yesterday?" And I was like, "Yes." It was, "Oh," and just things like that really puts into perspective when you've got the locals just coming in force like that and just telling you what it means to them.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic stuff there, Clark. I've just, for my listeners, the Tartan Army Sunshine Appeal, you can find it at tasunShineAppeal.scot. Examples of a range of activities can be included, such as sponsored walks, sponsored cycles, dinners, donations from match days, swallows, quiz nights, race nights, raffles, options, collections on buses or planes, etc. A real varied range, and it just seems to be growing, especially during the pandemic as well, which, you know, will have restricted some things, but I'm sure you'll be able to do some other things as well.
Well, we had, before lockdown, we had so many plans. I mean, we had a Q&A night with Colin Hendry in Glasgow, and that went in the storm. I mean, he had some great stories. And then we were planning one just before we went to lockdown with Kevin Gallagher, and we've been the case of we've been going back and forth to Kevin because he's really desperate to do it, and he just keeps just a case of we can't. Every time we think we get a date, the pandemic resurfaces, and it's a case of, right, we'll have to put it off to the other side of the summertime. but we're hopeful that one will go off. We've got a super fan who lives in Cyprus, Davy Proven. He's a St Mirren fan who lives over in Cyprus. He was in the army.
Yeah,
he just seems to be our guardian angel. I mean, he takes his own time and puts on buses, and he raises thousands of pounds for us. I mean, over the last year, because there's been no games, he's put on virtual buses, so he's run a team card and he's raised us hundreds of pounds.
Yeah,
and while it's been a hard year for us, when we were looking at our accounts, we're thinking, in terms of income, it's actually been pretty healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just down to initiatives like that the fans just giving to us because they know it's hard for us just now.
Yeah, it's just really frustrating with the whole pandemic, and I really hope you can get involved with doing some great stuff coming out of this, because it's fantastic to hear some of the stories that you mentioned there, particularly the one in Hungary and Ikechi Anyesmo. That's something that will last me forever. That's a wonderful story.
Well, that's fine. We made last year there was no fans at any games. We just made the decision, while our constitution says everywhere Scotland plays, it makes no reference to the fans, so we just took up the option that we'll keep donating, and that's helped us in a big way. I mean, we did a big one in Serbia, and we sent out a load of T-shirts that the SFA donated to us, the old Travel Club polo shirts, red with the Scotland badge, and we got like 2,000 of these, and we were able to get about 60 of them across this small farm in Belgrade, which helps children with Down syndrome. Basically, they fund their own. They fund everything through selling jams, and they do farm work just to produce crops. And we donated to them, and it was a case of the British Embassy were telling us that they've donated a T-shirt to the president of Serbia. So it was all over social media. The president posted this photograph of this donation we had made. So that was quite interesting.
Absolutely.
But it's not just the Scotland thing. There's also a Welsh equivalent of the Sunshine Appeal. They do a lot of great work as well. The Northern Ireland fans, we've just discovered that they do the same. There's a Ukrainian supporter who goes to all the Ukrainian away games, and everywhere he goes, he donates soft toys to a local orphanage. And when I was in Poland 2 years ago, I met this Polish football fan, and we just got chatting in a bar. I just got on the topic of the Sunshine Appeal, and we just got chatting away. And when I got up to leave at the end of the night, he just took me to the side and said, "Your stuff was so inspirational. I'm going to try my best to set up a Polish version of the Sunshine Appeal so we can get back as well." So it's a good thing that it just shows that fans can give back and what the power of football can do.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just say that again for everybody that's listening. You can find the Tartan Army Sunshine Appeal at TASA, TASA 1999 on Twitter, and you can look up the Tartan Army Sunshine Appeal at tasunShineAppeal.scot. Really interesting stuff there, Clark. Absolutely fantastic to hear some of your stories with that. You do a little bit of football writing as well, which I find really interesting. And, you've done a little bit of work for the Football Pink. Not one I know of, but I've heard of these Footy Times, which you also do as well. Is that something that you've had an interest in from an early age, or is that something that you just like to dibble away at from time to time?
Just a wee, something to dabble away at, a wee hobby now and again. It wasn't really anything I ever took seriously. I saw Football Pink. It's a fans run football magazine, just small time, but they said they were doing a copy in the Scottish football, and I just joined the Sunshine Appeal at the time, and I just thought that could be a good way of getting the advertisement of the Scottish fans in the Sunshine Appeal. So I emailed and said, "Look, if I produce an article, would you be willing to publish it? And this is what it's going to be about, the Scotland supporters charity." And they were really encouraging, and they gave me a 2-page spread in that. I've got something in these Football Times. I was talking about the Scottish links with Ukrainian football. I mean,
yes,
it's not something you'd think was big, but there is actually a pretty big background there. And it was a little something I'd been researched and dabbling away with, and I didn't really think it was ever going to count to anything. And then when I got it finished, I mean, I think it's about 80,000 words, so it is pretty big.
Yeah.
And I just sent it around all the football magazines and online articles, and not many were really prepared to publish it. Then these Football Times said, we do a lot in European football. We'd be very happy to publish. So I was quite proud when that got there.
Yeah, it's your pinned tweet on Twitter, which I think is really good. It's called An Unlikely Marriage Between Scottish and Ukrainian football, the Ukrainian influence on Scottish football. I had a read of this before we came on, and it's a fascinating read. I mean, my dad is a bit of a Rangers fan, and he remembers Kuznetsov. And of course, Ali McCoy talks about him very well because, I think he scored in a game against Celtic, and I think the Sati Singh and his partner at the Curry House in Glasgow, they were going to name their child after whoever scored the first goal in a Rangers Celtic game, and it was this guy Kuznetsov that got
Interesting.
Very interesting. But
I was quite good, and I was able to get in touch with Sergei Baltacha. I mean, he's now a coach at Charlton Athletic.
Yeah.
Basically had a few conversations over by telephone. He was really good. I mean, I spoke with Stuart Cosgrove off the ball. We spoke about his time at St Johnstone, and he was telling me how his uncle is actually Ukrainian, or I don't know if it was uncle in the sense of just friend of the family, but he was telling me he worked as Baltacha's translator when him and his family just showed up in Perth one day to sign for the club.
Yeah.
And then telling me his time at Inverness, which wasn't long, but he was just talking about it. Was quite an interesting guy to speak to, and I was really hoping to meet when I went down to London once, but just seems to be he's always busy.
Yeah, Stuart Cosgrove's a real character, isn't he? And I don't know about you, but I love Off the Ball, and him and Tam Kevin are fantastic, aren't they? Have you been invited on to talk about your stories? I think
no, nothing like that. No. I've had friends that have been on the show, and they said it's hard to get a word in, but
well, I've had Cowan on my own show, and I can definitely vouch for that.
Yeah.
He's a good character, though, to be fair, Tam. He's good.
Well, yeah, it's brilliant listening to. I mean, they're just fans on the radio, and they just say what the fans are thinking, and they don't take it seriously in any way, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, you don't get shows like that anywhere.
No. And
it's
absolutely
no,
fantastic.
it's just essential listening on us. I mean, my wife hates it. I mean, she doesn't actually understand that it's two shows. They do a show in the afternoon, and then they do a show after the game.
Yeah.
So she's hearing the show when we're going out in the car. She'll hear me. I'm listening to the show at lunchtime, and then we go out, and then we get back in the car, and I'm turning it back on for the evening show, and she's like, "Are they still talking?" There's a break in between.
Yeah. Well, it's now moved to a Sunday slot now, but absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear that. Clark, we're coming to the end of the podcast. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening and hearing some of your stories. Coming out of the pandemic for you, as a Scottish fan, as a fan of Aberdeen, as a fan of Rangers clubs, what's your incentives coming out of this?
It's probably my incentive is just really to get back to football. I mean, I'm just choked to get back to a game at Hampden, missing my wee match day rituals, going for a pint in this pub, having a blather with this friend who's got the train up from England for the day, or a friend from Dundee came down, just that type of thing. Walking along Battlefield Road, and you go over the hill, and there's Hampden waiting for you.
Yeah.
Then a game. That's just really all. I just want to get to a game of football and just get back to my little match day activities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I certainly hope that comes sooner rather than later for you, Clark. And I hope my listeners have really enjoyed our conversation, because I certainly did. Clark Gillis, thanks for coming on Campbell's Footballs to share your story with me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, listener, that brings us to the end of yet another episode of Campbell's Footballs. I hope this podcast was just what the doctor ordered. If you want to listen to previous shows or look out for future shows, follow Campbell's Footballs on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to other podcasts. You can also follow the show on Facebook at Campbell's Footballs. Search for me, StatOG91 on Instagram or other social media channels. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed the crack and enjoy Campbell's Footballs.
What a dangerous night.